And on the show today, we have Dr. Kalifa Oliver. And here is why she is awesome. She is the founder and managing partner of Deep Dive Consulting. What's that, you ask? Glad you did. A consulting agency to help organizations bring together leadership, employee experience, data analytics to discover value, retain, elevate. It's all about the talent. It's all about the talent. She has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. She has certification in people analytics from MIT. I'm not done. The breath is almost out, but she has 15 years of experience working in academia and the corporate world, all about people data, including organizations like Walmart, Wells Fargo, Stanley Black & Decker, all to improve people strategies, programs, and analytics. And here she is. Hello, Kalifa.
Hello, Russell. How are you?
I'm delightful. Thanks for asking. Today's VOE, and for those who don't know acronyms, it's Voice of Employee, but specifically all about the numbers, the stats, the data, what you need to understand to better serve those you're supposed to be serving, your employees. But before we get into any of that, we have to ask the question we ask all of our guests, Kalifa, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
So my worst employee experience is what I'll choose. And because it's such a timely thing right now. So I think the worst experience I've had as an employee thus far is being laid off from my job. And it was typical of what we're seeing now. It's not a performance issue, it's a cost measure, right? And it does feel incredibly dehumanizing and in that moment because a lot of our identity is so tied to work. And I think it was only in that moment I realized how much of my adult identity was tied to me working. When it happened, when I spoke to my ex-manager at that time, who himself was also he told me my mind would play tricks on me for about a week or two. And I promise you it did because you start like going through scenarios in your head, right? And I'm okay, right? It took some time. I was okay. But what I started to realize is I did need a break. It was almost like a forced sabbatical. I did need a break. I did need time to process my feelings, right? Because I woke up the next day without a job to go to for the first time in my adult life, and it felt strange, right? And the entire experience, when you tell somebody it's okay, it's not you, it's us, we're cost cutting, it makes you not feel human. It makes you feel like a thing, like a part of a balance sheet. And as somebody who's advocates employee experience and really thinking through how do we humanize processes and make people sense of decisions and make experiences, even the bad experiences, not feel so bad. That's not what happened. It was not the best experience. And so for me, it felt like I'd failed, but I'm fine, right? It turned out for me to be a forced break that I was not taking. It's forced me to really think about and reevaluate what I wanted to do. And I had long advocated in my career about layoffs and when bad things happen at work. And it occurred to me in that moment was the first time I had experienced it. Like so suddenly, so unexpectedly, right? And I say this and I tell this story, and this is the experience I tell because so many people are going through it right now. And I want them to know if you're going through it, if you have gone through it, if you think it's on the horizon, you'll be okay, right? You're gonna come through on the other side. You don't worry about how you feel the feels. Feel the feels. You have to kind of go through it. Don't let anybody tell you not to worry. If you gotta go through it how you want to. Just don't stay in it because you'll be okay. We have to learn as a society that our jobs do not have to be our identity. We make our jobs and we'll be okay. So I think that's why I shared that example.
But organizations can also be less assholes about it too. Like we're hearing stories about people finding out they got laid off because their security card didn't work. Like that's how they're finding out. That is,
there's so much competition that I call the race to the bottom, right? Like we don't all have to try to figure out ways to make it terrible. Like it's not a competition to do that. And I think that what's happening is some companies are giving other companies permission to be assholes. in
They're
that
normalizing it.
scenario. Right. And there are companies that have done it really well. There are companies that have really made the effort to do better, right? And like they messed up one round, they're doing better. I've seen the improvement, I've seen the effort that people go through. Even in the present company that I work for, there were layoffs. It's not ever, there's no good way to lay off anybody. There's no good way to do it, but there's bad ways, you know? And I've seen improvements, the effort it takes to really communicate, humanize it, people center it, really let leaders step up and talk about it. And not just for those who have been laid off, but those who stay, right? Because I think there's two different types of PTSD. That said, let me say, something that pisses me off on LinkedIn, if I could say it, it's like if somebody gets laid off, allow them to feel it. Don't be going on LinkedIn making it all about you. Hey, y'all, I still have my job, but if I can help, stop it. Stop it. Stop censoring it about you. You know what I mean? Like you could I am them. You just trying to make a show. Stop making a performance out of trying to be a hero. Stop it.
We hit a nerve. We hit a nerve, Kalifa. We hit a
Right,
nerve.
just like PSA, right? It irritated me before it happened to me, but it definitely irritated me. Like, come on, just
Fair.
walk away.
Fair.
Just I am them. Like, stop making a whole scene like you're a hero. Sit down somewhere.
Maybe if we listen to our employees throughout the journey, throughout an organization, that maybe we won't get to these, experiences, this theater of lack of kindness. So I want to start off. I want to start off because we don't define things well enough. I brought this up a lot in the podcast where we say things a lot, but we don't define things a lot. So I want to start by asking you first, how would you define VOE or voice of employee?
I think the voice of the employee is any way that an employee is trying to communicate with you about how they're feeling at any given point in time or how they're reacting to any initiative or program that you put through at any point in time. I think the mistake people make is when they think of VOE, they think of a survey, right? But people have multiple ways of telling us what's going on with them. It could be through their movement, right? What is your attrition starting to look like? Because that's a voice, right? They are telling you, I don't want to be here, right? It's whether they're moving away from one manager, moving from one department into the next department, right? You can data scrape. The one thing I tell organizations is if you don't find a way to harness the voice, the way the people are going to express to you what is happening within the organization, they will find a way. That is human nature. They will go on Glassdoor. They will go on Blind. They will sabotage. Right? People will always find a way to communicate how they feel. That is human nature. And that's what the voice of the employee is to me. It's any way, however they're doing it, they're creating a voice. And sometimes that voice is unheard, right? It is something that you have to recognize.
So how do you qualify that information, especially because I know you mentioned people think it's a survey. Well, they go to a survey because it seems like the easiest way to collect information. So what is the bridge from VOE to people analytics?
So I think it's the quality of data, right? I think we don't focus enough on the quality of data. So a survey is just one way of collecting data, right? And then you have all this HRS data on your people, right? You can get as fancy as you want, like network analysis, where you're really trying to understand the connections between people. You can look at where people are going. Where's your traffic going within your intranet as you try to communicate things, right? All those are ways that you can actually pull data. You have qualitative data, which I will tell you, unstructured data is some of my favorite data, right? Like I'm a survey advocate, but listen, I love me some unstructured data because a lot of times, just like any other thing, a survey is often biased to the person who's creating it, the person who's written it, right? Because it's close-ended and you just have to assume you know things about everybody. But you find things in open text that people that you don't ask about, you don't think about, right? So there's a privilege of things that I don't have to think about when I'm designing a survey. That's somebody who might be in the manufacturing plant, they think about. That is never something that will occur to me. And when you really do natural language processing and text analysis really well on unstructured data, it gives you this wealth of richness and robustness in data that adds context and color to the story of your people. And so that's what you have to do. Look for data in places that you may not think data exists. And if nothing else, the simplest way to get to the voice of the employee is just to ask them. I think we try to get too fancy sometimes, but sometimes you go back to basics. The simplest way, especially if you just starting out trying to understand the voice of the employee, just understand how people are feeling, just ask them. Walk around, ask them, send a survey, have a couple focus groups, right? Like ask them to write things down. I think look, like if you have an internet, really read what people are trying to say, because people, again, will always, the voice is always there. They will tell you the things. You just have to listen.
So I'm trying to do a chicken or the egg thought in my brain right here, and I'm trying to figure out how best to ask this. Should you be surveying, collecting information with an agenda, with an idea of what you're looking for? Or should you just be collecting all information all the time and then try to pick apart what you need? Like, where's the best approach for that?
I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So I'm giving you the full psychology answer, right? It depends. Now, the smartest way to do it is to never have preconceived notions of what you're going to collect. Because what you're doing is just throwing biases in there, and that is hubris, right? That is hubris on the part of many people who are in my field who are like, I know everything about people, right? I know what I'm gonna get, right? And too many times what you will find is when you're designing a survey or a tool or some sort of assessment, you are led by the voice of whatever leader is trying to get, right? The worst thing you can do is try to make the data say something, right? Data should speak for itself. So the purest and best way is to go without expectations. You should have a broad view of what you're trying to understand about the experience. So like when you're trying to understand the voice, you think about key factors across industries that will affect people. So like career development, leadership, company reputation, satisfaction, job clarity, those type of engagement. Those are key broad things. And then you write tools or create programs to get to that. But sometimes there's something strategic that you're trying to find out. Something has changed, something is new. So like you might be doing a new manager assimilation where you want to know more about what is the temperature of the room. In those cases, you want to write to the agenda of the things that you're trying to find out, right? But the best approach is always, as far as possible, to go in there acting like you have no idea what you're going to get back. And I think that allows the analysis to be richer, the data to be richer and cleaner, right? And more honest, if you will.
I keep hearing about survey fatigue when it comes to asking questions. I like a good eye roll. Please tell me the source of that.
My philosophy, and I will say it till my dying day.
Please do.
Survey fatigue is made up.
Okay.
It doesn't exist. It is not a thing. We've made it up. It's an excuse. It's blaming the vessel and the platform for inaction on our part. People are not sick of surveys. They're sick of us. Right? I tell leaders, they're not sick of these surveys. They're sick of you. Right? People will take 100 surveys back to back if they truly believed that something concrete will come of it. But I'm like, think of it in just everyday life. If I keep telling my BFF the same thing, you keep asking me, Kalifa, what do you want to eat? Kalifa, what do you want to eat for dinner? And I'm like, I want pizza. And you're like, okay, what you want to eat? Pizza. What do you want to eat? Pizza. And I can't get no pizza yet. I'm not gonna keep answering your question. I'm sick of you. Stop asking me the question. You know you're gonna bring me a burger every time. So stop asking my opinion, right? After a while, I'm gonna be like, you're gonna get me a burger anyway, so I don't care. I'm not answering the question. You don't really care about my opinion, right? And it's so I can't blame the question, what do you want to eat, right? I can't blame the vessel that he's asking me. I'm sick of him. Stop asking me, right? And so that's why I'm like, it's not survey fatigue, it's an action fatigue, right? Any way that we measure, any technology we use, people can get sick of, but it's not the thing. It's just the easiest thing to blame. It also allows organizations to distance themselves and not take the responsibility for not acting on what people are telling them. So like it's the survey's fault. No, buddy. Your fault.
Well, I get that too. When people tell me they're like, well, nobody likes emails anymore. I'm like, no, people don't like shitty emails anymore. If if you're a better communicator,
Right. Stop sending me an email that says okay. Like it was unnecessary. It pinged me. It stopped me from doing what I was trying to do. Like, stop, you know?
totally. So where is the line when it gets to, and I'm still sitting in the realm of myth, which is people might feel like they're being too big brother or too asking too personal questions. Like, where is the line where it's about improving the organization versus prying?
And that's where I think there should be a strategic reason. I do not believe in building voice listening systems or continuous listening systems if there is just collecting data for collecting data's sake, right? Because when you're strategic, you really think about the outcomes. You think about privacy. You think about the ethics of what you're doing, right? And there should be an outcome that is tied to it. And the outcome should not just be to make you feel better, right? Because that's where it becomes when you're monitoring and surveilling, just to monitor and surveil, and everything that comes of it, the only thing you act on is punitive, then that's the line where people are just like, this is stupid, right? But if it's strategic and you're really trying to make improvements, you're trying to make actual improvements in the everyday life of your employees with the aim of constantly setting them up for success, right? When you set your employees up for success, you are also setting your company up for success. You are thinking about your bottom line. It is just a longer term investment, right? When you're doing that, then when you truly think it through, when you have an end goal in mind, as in these are the actions we want to take, this is the investments we want to make, this is why we're doing that, then it's not Big Brother, right? Big Brother is when it's just, I'm just listening to listen. I'm just scraping data to have it because I'm going to use this whenever I feel to make it as punitive as possible. That's Big Brother. When there's a lack of ethics, a lack of really thoughtfulness about privacy, right? When you are just collecting that data to sit there to use, like rubbing your hands and stroking that imaginary bear, just waiting, then I can't support that. That's not voice of the employee. That's you being a complete and total asshole. That's all that is.
Now we kind of focused on surveys quite a bit, but you did mention that survey can be just one of many tools to collect that VOE. What are other approaches that maybe organizations are ignoring because surveys their default?
Yeah. Well, when I think about continuous listening, when you're thinking of voice of the employee, I think about four approaches. One is what we call voice listening. At least I call it. So it's four signals, right? I think people send four types of signals. One is voice signals, right? That is what people are saying to you with their voice. That is self-reported. And so that includes surveys, but there's also focus groups, right? It depends on what you're trying to do and how big, how fast you're trying to get information. Surveys are easy because you'd send out a lot very quickly to a broad group of people, but sometimes you really want to center on something. And in many cases, I recommend focus groups as a result of something you find in a survey, right? So there's that. There are asynchronous listening AI tools right now that I am in love with, right? Which really allows it's a focus group, but it's not a focus group where everybody has to sit together at the same time. And it allows people to do it at their own pace, and you're getting their voice, right? There's also intranets that you can scrape. You can scrape the intranet. What are people saying on our intranet? How are they responding to our communications? Are we saying the right thing? Is there something with our tone that people are complaining about? Is there something that we're not communicating, right? And then you go to things like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Blind, whatever, Fishable, whatever else is out there now, and you could really get a sense of how people are actually reporting about you, right? And you can really do some data modeling off of that. The other thing is what I call movement signals. And so that's more of the objective data that companies collect, things like how do we use the PTO? Where are people going? Are they leaving the organization? What is the average tenure? Are they staying? Who's staying? Why are they staying? Right? And so it gets you an understanding of how people are moving around. If they move, do they leave the industry? Are they just going to a competitor? What's happening? Because that's also telling you a story. That's them telling you how they feel about you, right? The other one I call connection, and this one is one of the things I love. It's organizational network analysis. A lot of companies do not use this because this is one of the things that for many people it feels big brothery, right? It's the one that I think makes some people uncomfortable. But I think it's because organizations, when they misunderstand it, they have leaders who abuse it, right? Org network analysis, the idea of it is to really understand how people are connected within your organization. Are there nodes and pods, and how are they networked with each other, right? For example, you could understand who are influencers in your organization, right? Who are the people who everybody goes to for answers? They're communicating with everybody. They bring different teams and departments together. This person has been in this role forever. If this person leaves, we break all those connections. So this person is more critical than we expect. This person probably should be promoted. This person is seen as an organizational leader and you don't realize that, right? Or you might realize that there's some groups working in complete silo, which may be impairing productivity. And we have to figure out how to connect how these people work. It's even more important to do things like that in this world of flexible location and remote work, right? Is there a difference that we're seeing in how people are connecting and the ways they're connecting, and are meetings too long? And there's an interesting metric I've seen with Microsoft's ONA, where you can see how much managers are in meetings with their directs, right? Because that's duplicated effort. Do you need to be and all that? That's a lack of productivity, right? What's happening in terms of, is there a gap that needs to be filled, that means the manager needs to be in these meetings? Because what that does is prolong their day. The last one is another one that I think is underutilized. I call it connection. Click signals. Click signals. I'm a big fan of user experience. How we try to communicate things to our employees is what empowers them to be able to do their jobs properly. And we often don't think about, when I post a policy in my intranet, are they going there? What are they actually clicking on, right? Are people looking at our benefits policy a lot, which means, do we need to do more work on our benefits, right? We think this is important, but all the traffic is going over here, right? When we post a certain message, the traffic response is great. We post another one, it's not. And so the leaders are here thinking, well, this is really important. Everybody will love this, but this is important to you. But clearly, what the data is telling us behind the scenes is that is actually what is important to our employees. That's what they're telling you, and they're telling you in their behavior, and they're telling you what they're clicking on across your organization and what they're doing. And I think that informs so much. Like, if everybody keeps clicking on benefits and then people start leaving and they're saying, because these benefits don't work, there is an issue with either your benefits package or how you're explaining what benefits people have, and it's unclear and it's causing uncertainty, and people rather get away from it. So those are the 4 elements that I use when I think about employee voice.
So there is one big weakness when it comes to collecting data, and that's because it involves human beings. Now,
it involves humans, and they're annoying.
You did mention off the top that there is either agendas or bias. What else gets in the way of properly collecting this information?
Trust. Well, I'll start with trust. The other thing is investment, and I talked about that. People are often, again, because people are annoying, people are often unwilling to hear the truth, right? So often you'll get, I don't want to hear, 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 right? I think this is what our culture is. And I'm the one coming in with the paperwork going, not so much. That's not the culture. I don't care. That's not what I think. That is not how it is, right? When I help organizations come up with continuous listening strategies and building out their listening programs and their employee experience programs, the first thing I say is if you're not ready to hear it, you're not ready for a program, period. We are our own worst enemy, right? Because what happens after a while is people will just tell you what you want to hear. And then when they're tired of telling you what they want to hear, they'll get out. And then they will tell all your business on social media, all of it. Every last piece of your business is going to be out there on social media. So I think that's what it is. And so that gets to the idea that I started with, which is trust, right? Trust is one of the biggest things. If you really want the employee voice and you're willing to act on it, you've got to take some time to build trust between the employee and the leadership. You have to, right? If you don't have that trust that I can tell you the truth about where we are and I will act on it and you will acknowledge that I said it, then there's no point, right? It's like speaking to a wall. What is the point, right? And I think that is one of the biggest things people take for granted with employee voice. The other thing is honestly having people who truly understand people data. And I know that sounds silly, but something I've seen with a lot of organizations is they think just because people can work with data, they can work with people data. Nay. Because people are unpredictable and people require context. And thinking that you can just work with data, which means you can work with people data, is not true. And I think we know that inherently because we do so well on the customer side. And those are people too. But then when it comes to our employees, we act like we forgot. A lot of the techniques, the voice techniques that I talk about, we've been doing it with customers for years. We've had personalization for customers for years. The difference is that customers are on the right side of the balance sheet, right? We think they bring in money. And we think that our employees fall on the side that they're just expenses, right? And we got to rethink how we see employees. We've got to rethink it.
You touched with trust. I immediately think culture, because if you don't have trust, or if you do have trust, I mean, both those are examples of the type of culture you have in an organization. I've had a lot of conversations that I believe anonymous surveys are a sign of a broken culture, because people don't feel they can be themselves or attach a name to the data. What are your thoughts on anonymous surveys? Because they are so prevalent.
No, I don't love anonymous surveys, but I'll tell you, depending on where you are in your culture, sometimes it's the best thing to do, especially if you're on the start of your culture journey. You just need the truth. If you just want the lay of the land, that is the best thing to do. If you're trying to make informed decisions, anonymous surveys are a nightmare, because people could take it multiple times. And the one thing about anonymous surveys that people take for granted is it increases the likelihood of trolling. People put awful things on anonymous surveys. They're not helpful at all. And so you imagine somebody like me who has to do all this analysis, and I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. But anonymous, I think you have to be real with where you are. When you're just beginning, if you're just in a rebuilding stage, if you're just trying to build out culture, nothing is wrong with anonymous survey, right? Because sometimes any data is better than no data, because you need a starting point and you need a foundation. But when you're really serious about making data-driven and empirically led decisions, then you need to have confidential surveys, and you need to be very clear that these are confidential. You need to be very clear who has the ability to see it, how is it reported. I think here's the truth. Even if I say a survey is anonymous, no employee ever believes it. They always think that there's somebody who's sitting down, twiddling their mustache and reading who has time for that, right? Like I worked at Walmart. I mean, at that time, Walmart was about 2.2 million people. When that survey comes in, we're talking about 97% response rate. It has taken forever for that file to open. Who has time to read every single comment? That is insanity. I can't do that. Like, I know you think when you take that survey, like how you feel is the most important thing at that time, but I'm just trying to understand what's happening, right? So that's the first thing. I think people just don't trust their organization. So it always gets back to trust, right? And It could be a sign of a broken culture, but it could also be a sign of somebody trying to build trust. And the first thing they're saying is, I just need to know how you feel. The one thing is, if you're trying to repair your culture or build your culture, truly get that trust, is you can do anonymous a couple times, a couple pulses, but you need to act. And the more you act, and the more you are honest, and the more you're transparent, and the more you report your findings, as you start moving into confidential surveys, then because people will tell you their business regardless. I promise you, right? I don't know why people will complain and then write me a whole paragraph about how they're feeling. They will put names and dates, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is too much. I didn't need to know. But I think it just depends on where you are. And I think, as we look at some of the cultures that I think are being broken right now, they may need to think of having like maybe anonymous pulses, which is like short things that you're just trying to find out some key broad strokes information. But anything related to strategic decisions, do I need to create a new career development program? Like a DEI, how are people feeling? Are there any ethical issues? Are there any microaggression type issues that may be impacting the experiences different groups are having or the entire group is having? That is strategic. Strategic surveys should be confidential, and they should be tracked and be able to be tied back to HRS metrics. But if you just want to know, in general, how's everybody feeling? What's the general temperature of the organization? Go anonymous. It's not that big of a deal. If somebody wants to take a survey 5 times, good on them. It's just whatever.
You mentioned that people need to know what to do with those people analytics, and that's where storytelling comes into my brain, which we can collect all the data in the world, but numbers mean nothing if you don't give it context and relatability. How do we get there?
So it's a skill that people have to learn. And I think it also gets down to, there's a lot of people who work with data, but not people data. And to your point, that's why you have to be able to tell the story of your people, right? The one rule that I've had, and I've always had, and I keep it near and dear to me, is that I have a big responsibility, because every data point is a human, it's a person, and that person affects other people. And as long as I remember that when I look at data and I look at trends and I look at patterns, I have to take care in how I'm reporting and really try to understand the interactions between multiple variables before I come to any sort of conclusions or make recommendations to leaders about what they should and should not do. I really think it boils down to us. It's hard, right? It's one of those things where it's hard to think about how do we really train people to understand data. But I think really trying to see the human. I know that sounds kind of warm and fuzzy.
No, it's compassion. You're working with humanity and compassion, not right? It's not columns.
Right. Like if I count dollars, I don't hurt a dollar if I don't count it, right? I don't hurt the dollar. Dollar will be fine, right? But with a person, right? That person, you make that decision and it's wrong. The the the, the consequence of that decision, it could go anywhere from a lawsuit to like harm, right? For me, it's not worth it, because you did not contextualize the data. I am a full believer in storytelling, and I think part of it is data is, and a lot of leaders will not admit to, but data can be very intimidating and very confusing. And one thing I've learned about leaders is they don't like to show that they don't understand something, and they're intimidated by what this data is saying, especially if the data doesn't say what they thought it was going to say, right? And a lot of what I have to do sometimes is to tell a leader, you have an ugly baby, yeah, And so I always have to be like, okay, so people think your baby's ugly. It's okay, okay. we could pretty this up. It's all right. What can we do? Right? Right? Like a lot of times that is what I have to do. That is my job. That is what my job is to get them to trust me. We're on the same team and I wouldn't do anything to hurt you. And so I go from once upon a time, right? Because what I encourage people to do when you are doing employee voice work is understand your people, understand your industry, understand the lingo so that you can tell the story appropriately. There are many people in my field who we're very academic. I blame us, right? We're very academic. And I will tell you, our work is boring. Okay. Working with data is boring. And I'm not even gonna lie to you, it's boring. Right? A lot of what I have to do is the most boring stuff in the world. It's structuring data, cleaning data. It is not sexy at all. It's boring. And I can go in and drone on, and 19% of people say this, and 20% of people say that, and everybody glazes over in the room. We don't care. But I need to inject life in a story. And I also need to see, and this is what we can do. These are the solutions. And so you really start with true storytelling, which allows your voice to remain in the room when you're not there anymore telling the story, right? Every story you ever think of that you remember, you don't always remember the first person who ever told you that story, but that story lingers. You can hear their voice. And a really good storyteller, whenever you think of that story, that's the voice you hear, that person who brought it to life for you. And that's what storytelling with data is. Storytelling with data means that you're moving past the data into the insights of the data. What is the data actually saying, and what is it telling you, and what can we do with this data? And that's that storytelling with data. And that is such a rush for me, and it's such a skill that's learned with time, because you really have to trust yourself in recognizing that you're speaking on behalf of multiple people, and the voice that you're using is yours and it's just a vessel. But this is the story of many people, and you're advocating action in order to create the outcomes that you're trying to make. So it takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of trust. And you start from scratch. You really do start with, well, once upon a time, there were people in an organization, and bring color to the data. And I think once you move away from the academics, you need to be steeped in some theory, but you move away from that and you really bring life, bring insight, bring context, bring solution, right? Um, that creates the story of the data, and that's the fun part. That's the part that a lot of people don't get to see. That's the fun part of working with data, honestly.
So Khalifa, give me a win. Give me an example where this storytelling has actually had listening to employees, collecting data properly, has actually moved the needle for an organization.
Oh my God, can I tell you a fun story? I always tell this story
I
because
love fun stories. They're my
it's
favorite.
one of my fun ones. It will seem so boring, but I promise it's not anticlimactic because it's so silly. Okay, so I'll go back to when I was at Walmart. So I'd been reading a lot of survey results that were coming in about the offices, and randomly in the qualitative data, I had noticed a pattern, but I put it aside. I didn't think about it. And then Walmart was in a process of working on creating a new campus. They were looking at creating new buildings and whatnot. If you've ever been to Bentonville, and this is changing, but if you've ever been to Bentonville, if you've seen a Sam's Club, the offices are essentially huge warehouses. Okay, it is just dark, huge warehouses. That's how it feels when you go there. And it, they were going to do it. And so at the very last minute, my manager said, "Hey, Khalifa, before they start working on the architecture, before they start making announcements, can we just check one more time? Send the survey out. Let's just make sure we know exactly what the employees want." I was like, cool. So I'm doing a standard. What do you want? Do you want this? Do you want that? What kind of, what kind of resources you want in there? What would make a really nice office? Da da da. And at the very last minute, I thought, you know what I keep seeing on surveys coming up randomly in open text that we don't ask about? Light. What the weirdest thing? light. People kept talking about how it was dark. People kept talking about light. I was like, I'm gonna throw in a question in here about light. So I said, what is because it's like what's important to you? So I put light and I said light, artificial, light, natural. Threw it in there. I know my boss probably watched me cross out my light or whatever. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's nagging me. Like I've heard like people keep talking about it and it keeps coming up randomly. Let's throw it in there. So I get we do the survey, we bring it back out. I mean, light is up there. light, light is out there. Folks want windows. Let me tell you, folks wanted some windows. So I write this report and I was like, what is really important to people is they want light and they want natural light. So as we build as we spend these multi-millions of dollars on this new campus, people really want natural light. They really want they want lights. If you could give them any lights, but they really want some natural lights will have them feel good. And what was hilarious to me is when they went back to they did their architectural plans and all that stuff. There was an announcement that finally came, a communication that finally came from the CEO, Doug McMillan, at the time. And towards the very end of the communication, it said, and yes, there will be there will be lots of lights. There will be lots of lights, and then people had a chance to see what the architecture plans look like. And it was hilarious to me because it was this random thing that I threw in there because of all the things that I had analyzed, and it stuck with me that there was this weird pattern of people constantly talking about darkness, right? It was this weird pattern of people talking about it. And it was me listening to things that under normal circumstances, somebody would have just said it's not important, but it felt important. Important enough that the CEO then addressed it. And it felt like a win. But you would think this is something that's not important. It's not something that you think about. But in people's want to have a good experience and be productive in these offices, they just wanted something as simple. We want light. So now in this multi-million dollar plans that you do, and you're like, yo, let's make sure we have some extra windows. Let's make sure there's light. And that's the CEO listening, and the real estate folks listening, and the operations people listening, and the finance person listening, that there is this thing that our employees are asking us for, and I was able to be the vessel for it. And for me, that was a huge win, right? Under normal circumstances, you think comp, you think equity, you would never think just light, which also goes to show you that sometimes the things people want is not a lot, right? People are sometimes asking for what they consider to be the smallest thing. But we're so busy trying to create these programs that are intricate and complex, and then we wonder why we're not moving the needle, because that's important to us as leaders, not to our employees. And I think shutting up and listening is what we need to do some more. So that's why I'm like, it's a weird example, but it's one that I absolutely love sharing because it's so practical that you don't think about it.
So an organization might kind of, sort of collect data, or they don't really at all. Do you start, like, where do you start? Is it pulse surveys? Is it take a crack at what a survey is? Where does it begin? Yeah.
I say start with a survey. I say if you want to just start somewhere, start with a survey. And that's like 2 points where you're just trying to start, do an anonymous survey to start. Test the waters, test your capacity, test your analytic skill. Just start with a survey. The problem is, of course, with anonymous surveys, if you're really trying to get some demographic data, you're going to have to lengthen the survey and ask those questions. So anonymous surveys really should be longer. But start with a survey, only because from a logistics standpoint, it is much faster and easier for you. And so that's why I always say just start with a survey, right? A survey could be your best friend, but don't lean on it, right? There's several ways as you mature. There's several other ways to use technology in your favor. There are more ways to really advance and get more analytics and get fancy and do modeling. But if you're just starting out, my rule, just ask the question. Just ask the question. I won't say focus groups as a start because focus groups could be unwieldy. And one of the side effects of focus groups is sometimes the loudest person in the room is who dominates your focus group if it's not well managed. And sometimes that's hard when you're just starting out to understand how to manage because it means there are new people doing this new thing. And you don't always want to bring out an outside facilitator to do that. So you may not have the funds for it. A well-designed CV, if you're going to invest in something, a well-designed CV. If you need me to build one for y'all, people, I can do that.
Oh, there'll be links in the show notes for sure.
I can do a well-designed CV.
What excites you? Technology is such a big part of this. Humanity is such a big part of this. So we're looking more organizations. Suddenly, I mean, I don't know what the hell happened. Maybe a pandemic where suddenly organizations seem to start giving a shit about
little
employees.
something happened.
Weird.
Yeah.
So what excites you about the future of people analytics?
Two things. I think during the pandemic, technology advanced in such people technology, communication technology, asynchronous technology, it advanced at such a rate that it's allowing us to do so many other things. And people started to pay attention to really trying to use technology, which makes me incredibly happy. The nerd part of me is just happily dancing and singing that there are different ways to collect data. So I love it. I think also what really excites me right now about the future of work is people can't ignore people anymore. The people aspect of work cannot be ignored. We're trying, as you can see now, we're trying to go back to it. We can't. We can try. It's archaic. HR moved into the future just a little bit. HR has been a dinosaur for a very long time. I'll say it. I'm in it. I can talk about my people. We've been dinosaurs. Everything is just one correct way to do it, which is not the way. It's not the truth. I think what people discovered very quickly is when a company has to do something, they can do it. If you need me to work remotely, I can. Right? So you have all these people, for example, people with different abilities and disabilities who found out that all of these accommodations that they had asked for, they could have gotten if companies had just tried. There's no going back from that. There's no going back for people realizing that they don't have to stay in traffic if they don't want to. There's no going back to realizing that people can spend time with their families and work, right? There's no going back from that. And honestly, with all these layoffs, there will be no going back from that either, right? When the market swings in the other direction, the trust is broken, right? So a lot of these giants that people like, I must work for them, they're great. You realize that they're just companies too, right? So I'm happy with what I call a little bit of an awakening. I don't want to call it the great anything because I'm sick of the great stuff, labeling everything. But there just seems to be an awakening where people are realizing that work is a part of their lives, and companies are realizing that these are humans. These are humans. And I think those two things together, then you mix up some new technology. Oh, yeah. The future is bright for us. Okay, the future is bright. We just gotta let some of these old fogies who just want to do things one way, they just gotta retire and go to an island somewhere and chill out and play some golf while the rest of us just enjoy what the future brings.
So I got to ask the last question, Kalifa, which is, and I think it's a perfect time for it. What's one simple action people can do right now to improve relationships at work?
So this is going to feel very counterintuitive.
Oh, do it. Do it.
Take a break from work. And I mean, don't stop working. I mean, take your PTO. Take the days off. Take a couple of days, and don't just try to do one long. Let me just take 2 weeks off, because you'll find at the end of that you're not as relaxed as you think you are. You need to take multiple time. Take the time that you've given. And the reason why I'm saying that is you need to fill yourself up. You need to take care of yourself. What I've found is when you fill yourself up and take care of yourself, you can go in and be great at work, and you're willing to help. You have more room for empathy and care and for building relationships and for being a good cook and being a good manager. You have to take the time to fill yourself up. Relationships at work depend on your relationship with you, right? And I think that is what I really want people to know. And if you don't remember anything that I said this entire time, got you gotta take care of yourself. Your well-being matters, however that looks, right? But take the day, even if it's pursue a hobby, sleep if that's what you want to do. Run around with your kids. Eat something that you've been wanting for the longest. Go work out. Go run. Go write a paper if that fills you up. Go clean the house. Like if those are the things that fill you up, fill yourself up. That relationship with you is so important. And going back to the first question you asked me, like it was my worst experience, but I was able to take some time out and fill myself up, right? I took a trip. And I realized I have the privilege of doing that. Took a trip. I spent more time. I started doing so. I love swimming. I started swimming every day because I had this extra time, and really like getting to know me, right? I did really getting to know my therapist even more. But I was able to fill myself up. And what I realized is I hadn't filled myself up in so long. I was tired. I was exhausted. And I probably wasn't the best that I could be. And I think now I have the ability to be me and be better. And now I'm really focused on telling my team, take the day. You'll have a lot going on. Go. Fill yourself up. That's the one thing I think you could do. Fill that relationship with yourself and fill yourself up. And then you could be amazing at anything else.
That is Dr. Kalifa Oliver, who is the founder and managing partner of Deep Dive Consulting, which is all over those people analytics to make the employee experience so much better for those you're responsible for. Thank you so much, Kalifa.
Oh, well, thank you for having me anytime. I appreciate it.